Good morning. Today we look at Judges chapter 7 and 8. And just as Joshua had fought the battle of Jericho, Gideon now has been instructed by God, as we read yesterday, and Gideon tested God with the fleece, the wet and dry fleece. But Gideon sets out to defeat the army of the Midianites, to drive them out of the land of the Israelites so that they can take possession of the land. And the start of chapter 7 in my Bible has another name for Gideon. It says then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon. So we see that often they had more than one name that they were called by, but it doesn't matter because it says Gideon and the men with him had encamped beside the spring of Harod, and the Lord said to Gideon, "You got too many men." And and he says to Gideon, you go out and you tell your men, anybody that's afraid, anybody that has any fear at all, go home. And 22,000 went home, which left Gideon with 10,000, which is still a substantial army in many ways, unless you're going up against 150,000. And so his army had been reduced from down to 1/3 of its size, and God says, "Oh, that's still too many." Because if you go to battle even with that many men, and you're victorious, they're going to say that it was you that was victorious, that it was the men that were victorious. They're not going to give the glory to God. And so God again says to Gideon, we need to reduce the army. And I'm hoping and knowing that most of you are familiar with these stories, but Gideon, or God instructs Gideon to have the men go down to the river and take a drink. And the majority of the men go to the river and they kneel down and they put their face, their mouth right down on the water and drink. 300 of them take their palm and get water in their palm, and it says, "Lap it like a dog." And God says those 300 will be sufficient. So think about that. He's gone from 32,000 down to 300 men. And Gideon has the faith in God to go forward, to continue this battle. And, there must be a little bit of uncertainty in Gideon's part, because when you get down to verse 9 in this chapter, God says, if you wonder at all, Gideon, go down and just listen at the camp. And he goes down and he hears one man telling another of a dream. And the second man says that dream means that Gideon is going to come and rout us. This is, Gideon and the God of Gideon are going to come. And Gideon hears that, and he knows that he can trust in God. And so he does what God says. He gives each of these 300 men a trumpet. Have you ever gone to battle with a trumpet? Yeah, you have a bugler, but just 300 men with trumpets. And at my sign, he says, "Blow your trumpet, shout and holler." And they do that. And the camp is utter confusion. And they end up killing themselves because they don't know what's going on. Because the Spirit of God has caused this confusion so that God might be the one who wins the battle. And that the people will see that it is God who continues to lead and guide them. That God is faithful to his promise, to give them this land. And this is what they do. They split up into 3 groups of 100 apiece, and so they were sounding the horns on different sides of the camp. But a complete rout of this army. And then after this, then one of the tribes, the Ephraimites, it says in chapter 8, come to Gideon, and they're upset because none of their men were called up to go into this war battle, and are we no good, kind of? They're taken aback because they weren't called up to war. Man, that would be the best thing as far as most of us would be concerned, that and I think about our National Guard and all of our soldiers, Army, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, each and every one of them. They hope that their battalion doesn't get called up, but if it does, they go willingly. Maybe a little bit begrudgingly, but they go. So here the Ephraimites are upset because they didn't get called into battle. But Gideon speaks to them, and their anger against him goes away. He talks to them, and they figure out, yeah, okay, that's all right. And so Gideon and his men are going to continue this conquest. They cross over the River Jordan, and they're hungry. They need some food. They need nourishment. In the first place, they stop. Why would we give you food? I mean, you haven't beat anybody yet. I mean, and they looked, and I'm sure they thought, well, you got no chance, And Gideon said to them, these were the people of Peniel. And when I return, I'm going to break down your tower, your temple. And not your, but this tower. And then he goes to another town. And again, we have this problem. But in verse 10, it says that Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with their army, about 15,000 men. Substantial army, all who were left of the army that 120,000 men bearing arms had fallen. So this was the army that Gideon had gone up against. There had been 135,000, 120 were gone, and only 15,000 were left, but 300 men. And again, God leads and God guides and God provides the victory. And there are, the princes, the leaders of the armies of the cities are captured and put to death. I mean, and again, it's some of that grisly stuff that, why do we have to have this as a part of our history? Why does God have to completely destroy all of these peoples for his chosen nation of Israel? It's hard in so many ways. But again, in verse 15, well, do you already have possession of these lands that we should give bread to your troops who are exhausted? No, we're not going to feed them. We're not going to feed you. I mean, you haven't done it yet. And again, when he goes and is successful, he comes back to these communities as he said he would. And the Tower of Peniel is destroyed, and others as well. And then we come down to verse 22. Gideon has proven his valor and his courageous following of God. And you think about Gideon and how he followed God and had trust in God for, going up against this battle with 300 men. This is Gideon's faith and trust in God. And so the people come back and they see that in Gideon, that he's faithful to God and that God is leading and guiding. And they say to Gideon, we want you and your sons' sons to be rulers over us. In verse 22, for you have delivered us out of the hand of Midian. And Gideon says, I will not rule over you, nor will my sons rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. And so, this is, Gideon is realizing that it isn't me, it's God. And he says, it isn't me that's ruling over you, it's God that's leading and guiding. It's God doing it. It isn't me. Don't put your faith in me. And Psalm, not going to think of it right now. It's better to put your trust in the Lord than to rely on human insight. It's always better to trust on the Lord than to trust on your own strength. And I'm not getting the citation in my head here right now from those verses, but they're there. It's always better to trust in God. And in Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge God, and He will lead and guide you. These are the things that we need to do. And this is what Gideon did, and this is what the people saw in Gideon. And Gideon said, it's not about me, it's about God. And so then we come, Gideon has all of this, and they've given him, Gideon says, well, give to me all of the earrings, and it's a tremendous, like 1,700 shekels of weight, which is, that's a lot of gold and jewels and baubles and stuff that were in these earrings. And it says that, in verse 27, all Israel prostituted themselves to it, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. All of this wealth, all of this plunder that they had gotten, the Israelites starting to forget all of those things. But verse 28 is that reminder. Midian was subdued before the Israelites, and they lifted up their heads no more. And then the land rested for 40 years. They lived in peace. They lived in harmony. The Israelites were settling and learning to trust God and following God. And then, and Gideon went to live, it says, in his own house. But then Gideon got old and died. And they buried him. Verse 32, then Gideon died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of his father. Verse 33, as soon as Gideon died, the Israelites relapsed, prostituted themselves with Baal, making Baal Bereth their god. You know, they forgot about God. You know, here just boom. This faithful Gideon dies, and the Israelites are just kind of, well, I mean, what are we going to do now? I mean, just absolute panic. I mean, maybe not panic, but they turn and they forget about God. And we all know what happens then, you know. I mean, things don't go so well for Israel. And, you know, it's just to remember God, to trust in God is such an important thing for all of us. And we see that time and time again in the Israelite history. And I really think that that's why, you know, we have these words written that show God's leadership and God's guidance in the battles of the conquest. And it's not that the Israelites were always good, but it's a reminder for us that God battles evil for us, that God battles Satan for us. And when we follow God, you know, things are going to be so much better. May you live in his blessing again today.